We're here today with Dr. Ivan Holmes, who's our guest. And as most of you know, Dr. Holmes will be competing in the Democratic primary for state superintendent, which will be decided this fall, along with a lot of other statewide races, legislative races, etc. So we've got a very busy campaign season ahead of us.
Yep.
And we want to welcome you as our guest today, Dr. Holmes, and look forward to hearing your responses about education.
Okay.
First thing I want to ask you is, if you wouldn't mind, just share your academic background, including your work experience, as well as any certifications that you have.
Okay.
If you're certified as a public school teacher and or as a superintendent.
Okay. Well, I'm a retired professor, and I've taught for about 40 years in the classroom. I was also head of a journalism school and PR advertising at a couple of universities at the end of my career. I come from a family of teachers. My sister taught for 40 years in Edmond.
Great.
I've got 3 nieces teaching in Edmond now. And that's really what persuaded me to get into this race. I was the last one to announce for the race, and I went to the first meeting that they had of the professional educators, about 3,500 of them.
Yeah.
And I wanted to listen to see what they were saying.
Right.
And I came away not hearing at that initial announcement somebody talking about the 3 important issues that I thought needed to be talked about.
Okay.
And my background as far as education is concerned, I am old enough that I ran Bourne's campaign for governor.
Wow.
When I was teaching at Northeastern as a young professor.
Yeah.
And we had the broom and the sweep out the old guard, and
Yeah.
you know, and no one thought we had a chance, and we couldn't win. And
You go way back then.
way back, yeah.
Politics. Yeah. Now, jump back onto the certifications that you have had in the past or have now.
Yeah, the only thing I was certified is with a teacher. When I was working on my doctor, I taught at Tulsa Central,
Right.
history, and that was during the 3 years I was getting my doctorate in there. And most people laugh when I say this, but the best educational experience I got was the 3 years that I substitute teaching full time. And I mean from first grade to 12, and believe me, that's where I became.
Now, where was that? Where was that teaching that you did that?
That was in the Tulsa area
Tulsa
as a
area,
substitute teacher. And,
Right.
and in those days, you just went where you needed. It could be
Right.
the first grade, it could be the 12th grade, it could be history, it could be anything.
Right.
Because they just needed somebody to do it. And I'll tell you, I really learned to appreciate elementary people.
Yeah.
But most of my teaching has been in college.
Okay.
And I taught at Northeastern, and then I taught at, I started out 2 years at Northeastern A&M Junior College in Miami, and then Northeastern State those years. And then I taught at the University of Arkansas, and then I retired from SMU in Dallas.
Okay.
And so most of my experience has been in the higher area.
Right. What is your opinion of high stakes testing? For example, the policy we have now about 3rd graders
Right.
being retained if they
Yep.
can't read,
Yep.
and also of denying graduation to some high school students if they haven't completed their studies.
Well, you know, I'm kind of the old guard, and so when I got in this race, I've gotten in my car, I've driven over 10,000 miles, and I've been in 307 superintendent's offices.
Wow.
I've been 10 miles from the Texas line and 10 miles from the Arkansas line. I've talked to superintendents that were Democrats and superintendents that were Republicans. I've talked to superintendents that got A's and got F's.
Yep.
I've got the whole gamut.
Right.
And where I made a mistake as a journalist is I should have taken a tape recorder with me, because there's a book there. I'm really serious. There's a book there. And it verified what I thought might be happening, but I didn't think it would be that magnitude. But all 307 of them have told me that they want the superintendent beat bad. A third of them have changed parties.
Right.
They were Democrats. They've changed. They said, look, we're going to vote for the Democrat in the final go around,
Yeah.
but we got to knock her off if we can. And
Right.
and a third of them told me in my face, you know.
Okay.
And they say, look, we're as good a Democrat as you are. And I said, well, I don't know. I was chair of the Democratic Party 2 years.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
like to kill me.
Yeah.
But I understand why you're doing it, because one of the things that I kept hearing is a Democrat can't win. Well, I would agree with that most of the time. But timing, as you know, is everything in politics.
Sure, yeah.
And I ran Lloyd Field's campaign for labor commission.
Yes, right.
And they said, you can't win, you can't even beat the Democrat, let alone a Republican.
Yeah.
And Brenner Renault had been in there 14 years.
Sure.
And he spent 7 nights a week at my house for 9 months, and we drove to Everett County for 9 months and set up an organization.
Right.
And she didn't take us real serious.
Yeah.
And we beat her.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
But it was the timing and setting up the organization.
Well, and as you know, to me, in my view, of all the statewide elected officials that we have, this is one that is really a nonpartisan, should be a nonpartisan position. In fact, we've had bills in the legislature before to make it not even an elected position, but an appointed position. Right. And so we'll see where that goes in the future.
I haven't answered your question.
That's all right. Go ahead.
And I didn't mean to not answer it, because I would be happy to, because I'm running for 3 reasons. Okay. And the why a Democrat can win was just kind of a side point to that. But the first reason, I went in there because I wanted the superintendent beat at any cost. Okay. Because I know what she's confrontational, and how you can alienate 500 superintendents is beyond me. How any one person can alienate 500, but she has. And I, as a joke, started out carrying the dental drill with me, which I have. and I got her over in Cherokee County. Cherokee, Oklahoma, in Alfalfa County. And I held up that drill and I said, "What is this?" She said, "What's a dentist drill?" And I said, "Yeah, you're a dentist, not an educator, but you become one." Right. And I said, "I'm an educator, so I'm going to become a dentist. And I'm going to drill your teeth for nothing." And they laughed. Yeah. And then I said, "And I'm not responsible for my dentistry, just like you're really not responsible for what you've done for education." But the point is my intent. I had 3 goals, and one of them was to be sure she didn't win. Okay. Anybody else to start with, but that. Okay. My second goal was to return education back to educators. Right. And by that, it's all of this. There should be every superintendent one test, one standardized test, ACT. Okay. And we're not going to grade a professor or a teacher on just that one test, because what I found out is if you're in the community out there, or even in Oklahoma City, where you've got the lower echelon, they come from broken homes, they come from drugs, half Hispanic in Oklahoma City, they can't speak English, they're going to get F's. And if I'm out here at Deer Creek, or Piedmont, or Edmond, where I went to school, they get basically A's because they've got good parental, and it's just apples and oranges, and that's what superintendents told me. I had 3 superintendents that got A's whose wives taught down the road that got S because their schools were totally different. Yeah. And those grades are really nothing but a reflection of the community and the poverty and what they're in.
And you're talking about the A through F grades now.
Right.
Yeah, okay. But how that relates to your view on end of instruction teaching, I'm assuming is you think we have too much of it right now.
It's way too much.
Okay.
And I wrote an article a number of years ago on master teaching. And I said, here's what it is. And I have that article, and every superintendent has agreed that's what it is. Okay. And what we've got to do is, we're talking about the 3rd grade. What we got to do, we should never get a kid out of the 1st grade until they're able to do what needs to be done. Right. But the problem is, educators now have to do 8 jobs. Everything from obesity to drugs. They got to be parents. Right. And we're overloaded. In other words, these teachers have 30, 35 students. Right. And in that 1st and 2nd grade, they need about 15 or 20. Right. And we need to put our money right there. And we need to hire good teachers, and we need to pay them, and that's where it should go. Yeah. All that money should go right there, right then.
All right. Good point. What is your view on Common Core?
Okay. That's another thing I found interesting of the superintendents that I talked to. They said, we could answer. I said, what is Common Core to you? Mm-hmm. And they said, we used to be able to answer that. We can't tell you now what it is ourselves because it changes every day. Right. See, Common Core to me is so basic. It's just really nothing but reading, writing, and arithmetic with mostly emphasis on reading and writing. And it's not the fact that there's anything wrong with having standards. And there's not anything wrong with having a Common Core in English or math. It's the way it's set up and the way we're implementing it is the flaw. And again, what I want to do is I want to teach the way I was taught. Right. I want Common Core, and then I want our teachers, but the teachers are the ones that know how to teach that. And if we got master teachers, I'm just telling you, they could teach in a tent and teach students how to do those things.
Right.
So right now I was in a meeting today with 33 superintendents, and they're just going crazy over this Common Core. And they said what everybody's trying to do, including the governor and the legislature, is they're trying to appease everybody.
Right.
And their opinion was today, it's going to make things even worse. And they're alienating everybody on both sides now, because no one really knows. What I suggested to these legislators, why aren't they getting in their car and driving out there like I have for 10,000 miles and actually looking at these schools and seeing what's been done and learning from it, because they don't know what is really going on out there at that level.
And at least in their own districts, they certainly should know.
They should.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think traditional public schools in Oklahoma are failing our students? And if so, why? And if not, why not?
Well, if you want to compare our schools today to when I went to school, then yeah, we've got some problems. But again, it comes back to money. Now I know the Daily Oklahoman's going to run an editorial, and they're going to say funding has nothing to do with the quality of education. But believe me, it does.
Yeah.
And we're last in the nation in funding. First in cuts.
Yeah.
Where's the $200 million in lottery money that they took away, they didn't replace? That needs to be put back in education, and it needs to be left up to the educators. Make them accountable, but let them determine whether a kid goes on to the next grade or not. They're the experts that know how to do that. But it shouldn't be the national government or the legislators making those decisions. It should be those educators.
Right. Yeah. What should be the outcome, if any, for a school that gets a bad grade, say a D or an F?
Again, to me, they're a total farce.
Okay.
There is no accountability. And again, you get out there in those communities and you've got superintendents. I thought when I visited the superintendents that got A's, some of them would have something good to say about them, but they don't.
Yeah.
Every one of them say they're meaningless. And this comes back to a couple of other questions. And really, the second reason I entered, and I'll just tell you now, is to destroy ALEC and charter schools. I'm not against charter schools, but not using public money and vouchers, because they're going to destroy public education.
Yeah.
I wrote a news release, and I put on there, I am recommending that every superintendent ignore the A to F schools. And I said if I were in the third grade, I wouldn't get out of the third grade, because I was a terrible standardized test person. I couldn't sit in the seat in the third grade long enough. And the Oklahoman ran an editorial, and they said, Dr. Holmes, why would anybody vote for him? He can't even get out of the third grade. But I think they're a farce, and I'm against them.
All right. Now, another very general question, but what is your position on teacher retirement? And I think by that maybe the questioner is asking, are you happy with our current system? Do you think it's a good idea to change the pension system of teachers? But what's your view on that?
Well, you ought to know what my view is, because I'm on teacher retirement.
Yes.
And so I can tell you, again, politicians, if they'd left that fund alone and not used it for other things, we wouldn't be in the shape we're in right now.
Right.
My teacher retirement really is pretty bad to start with, but I sure don't want them messing with it. And I've meeting with retired teachers everywhere I go, and they are scared to death that they're going to start meddling in that and changing it. And they need to leave it alone.
And it wouldn't affect, of course, yourself or other teachers that have been in the system, but for new teachers that are just starting in, what's being discussed, as you know, is a major change from what we have right now.
Yeah.
So your view on that would be, it's not broken, leave
That's
it alone.
right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Now, this question states, what areas of education do you think are underfunded, and what areas, if any, are overfunded in terms of just where we allocate money on the state level? Underfunded areas and or overfunded?
Well, again, this has come back to my primary belief that all of education is so underfunded that we really are in a crisis. And the tough question is, and all these superintendents have asked me this, let's just say you get this job. How are you going to go down there and make a difference when the governor and legislature are going to do what they want to do anyhow, and they're not going to listen to you? And I said, I've got one answer for that. I sat in a meeting in Duncan last week with 15 superintendents and the House and Senate person there. And for an hour and a half, they tried to explain to them about funding and taking away their surplus. And by the way, they took away 160 million of the surplus is gone this year.
Right.
And they're really, a lot of these schools are going to really be in a real crisis in the country schools. But the point is, they weren't listening. It was just like rain going off a roof. And so the Duncan superintendent asked me to speak while they were there. And I said, you guys haven't listened to a word of these 15 superintendents. And I said, superintendent said, well, what can we do? And I said, I'm going to tell you what you can do. Invite these two guys back in a month and let's have 1,500 people in Duncan. I'm talking about the local chamber. I'm talking about people that elect them. And we're going to say either you start funding education, and by the way, 82% of the people in Oklahoma want public education funded, number one.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it is the most important thing we got. It's the only help. You know, if we want to help DHS, we better start educating our kids.
Right.
If we want to help the jails, we better start educating people. It's got to start there. Right. And I turned to those guys and I said, if there were 1,500 people next month, what would you listen to? And they said, well, we'd have to. We wouldn't be reelected. And I turned to those superintendents and I said, if I'm superintendent, you won't find me in the office. I'm going to be in all 77 counties, and I'm going to be talking to the Kiwanis and Rotary and the local chamber. And we're going to call those representatives in and say, either you start supporting us or we're going to run somebody against you. The only answer.
Good. All right. In general, what are your views on charter schools?
Well, again, I did not realize and started doing the research. Alex scares me to death, and I know you may think I'm crazy and I'm over dramatic. It's the greatest threat to the democratic process in my lifetime, because they want charter schools to come in and replace public schools with no rules and regulations. And this brings me to my second goal, is destroying Alec and public. But I'm just going to be honest with you. I'm also out to not just beat the superintendent, but I'm out to beat Freddie Deskin, because she was put there by the charter schools, and we can prove it. And she has lied and said that Ham didn't even know about Alec, and Ham is given is a corporate sponsor and given, and he helped put her in there.
Right.
And so I don't have a problem with Jack getting it.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with Cox getting it.
Yeah.
Or I'll be all right.
Right.
But I'm just telling you, if we get Frida Deskin in there, and I'm just being honest with you,
sure,
she's lied about being an astronaut. She's lied about superintendent of schools. And why she's lied about this, I don't know. But she said she was married for 31 years till his death, and she'd been divorced, and he'd been married for somebody else for 10 years. Why would you put that in there? She said that Harold Ham said he wasn't familiar with Alec. Yeah. Well, he's a corporate sponsor. How could you not be familiar? You know, said she has a degree from Harvard, which is not true. Said she was a superintendent, this is not true. So I'm just telling you.
Currently, as you probably know, charter schools can evaluate their teachers using any methods, that they want to.
Yeah.
They do not have to use the TLE that has been used to evaluate public school teachers.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on this? Is this an unfair system? What do we need to do to rectify that, or just give us your opinion?
Well, again, in two different debates, Jack and I have tried to get Deskin at her school. If you want to be superintendent and represent public schools, you should have stayed in public schools. But we want to know how much you're paying your people. We asked you the other day, somebody from the audience, you've got a felon working in that school. Who approved that? And she said, and act like she didn't even know there was a felon in that school.
Yeah.
But the point is that they don't have to disclose any of those things. And I asked her 3 times, how many certified teachers do you have? And she said, we got qualified teachers. And I said, I didn't say qualified, certified.
Right.
And she said, they're qualified. I said, 3 times. I said, I'm not talking about qualified. Anybody can be qualified by somebody for something. I want to know how many of them are certified. I want to know what you're paying them. I want to know the whole accountability, just like, and she won't give it. Yeah. So I'm sorry, but I just can't. It's apples and oranges.
Okay. Do you have any criminal charges in your background, and have you ever been charged with a crime? If so, please explain.
That question was asked of us at Sand Spring.
Okay.
And it was just pretty easy. No. And then whoever asked that question brought up that felon deal and asked, and again, this is true.
Right.
She lied and said that none of that happened, and we have that, by the way, on tape.
Yeah.
That is important.
It emphasizes, as you say, that emphasizes the the huge factor that it plays and how important it is, especially for somebody that's going to be leading the education system in our state. Now, wrapping up here, just a couple more things. Let me ask you this. Please share what your vision is for the State Department of Education and for our public schools, and then also, what changes would you make to the department if you're elected?
Okay. Well, again, the biggest change I would make if I was elected is I would, as I said, return education decisions back. And I'm telling you what, I thought maybe we had a bunch of lazy or overpaid superintendents. And maybe there are some bad ones somewhere. There's bad lawyers and doctors and everything else, but I haven't found them. I really haven't. And these superintendents are working their heads off. They're doing 5 jobs out in the smaller school. They're responsible for all these things. So I would make sure that and I carry this hoop because there's a reason for that. If you've got your students and parents here and your master teachers here, at the bottom of that loop you got your superintendents and school board, and over here you got that office, and you're communicating and working together and talking on these things. And I told them I'd call you all in, we'd agree on common core as educators, and then we'd go do it. But I would allow teachers to make those decisions that are important. The second thing I would do, I've got about 10 lawyer friends in Oklahoma City that I've known all my life. And they said, Ivan, if you get that job, are you really going to get tough and on discipline in those classrooms and start controlling the classrooms? And are you going to be able to? I said, yeah, let them sue me.
Yeah.
They'll told me they defend me for nothing because they're tired of what's taking place. It's chaos in these places now. And we've got to get control of that.
And sort of as a corollary to that question I asked you about changes, is the State Department, is it too big? Are there too many employees there? I mean, is it the right size, or do you think it could be smaller or larger?
You know, as you know, it's a massive organization.
Right.
And I've looked at that. And I'm be honest with you, I'm not, and you ask Jack Heron that, and he can probably answer without any trouble, because he worked in there, and that's his money and budget's his
right.
You know, his deal. I, on the other hand, am more of a catalyst for, I think I could go out as superintendent. And I would be out there, not telling these people how to do their business, but saying, look, what do we need and what are we going to have to do? And I would finance, as I said, I put most of that money in those first 3 grades. And if we had to have night school, if we had to do it on weekends, if we're not going to let them get out of there. And in some of these schools, you're going to have twice the help than in others.
Right.
So I see me as superintendent, it being in the 77 counties, trying to educate our parents and our public about where we're at and what we're doing, and getting adequate financing. And I know financing's tough, but and just like the income tax, we all want income tax. But you know what? We're going to pay for education, and it is the most important thing in our life.
Right.
And my goal would be is the first grade. I'm going to put every resource we have, including master teachers and everybody else, and we're going to get those kids out of that first 2 or 3 grades, and they're going to know what they're doing in the beginning. And that's where my emphasis would be.
Right.
I don't know on the payroll, you know, how wisely that money's being used and to what extent. But again, I know that we're not financing what needs to be financed.
Right. 1 and 2 we got, but I want to hear, as you close, kind of what your third reason is and anything else you'd like to share.
Okay. Yeah, and I understand that a lot of this goes to teachers. In other words, it's the same. And what I would ask the teachers to do is to educate yourself. And I've got a packet that I take with me, and I share it with every superintendent and every teacher I talk to. And it talks about Alec, it talks about Gates, and he's changed everything that he's forced down the system because it wasn't working. It talks about closing our schools and how they're trying to do it. It talks about Bourne putting $300,000 of his own money to try to get education funded. You know, it's just information that educators need to educate themselves on.
Okay.
And what I would ask is you get back to the days of 30 years ago, and you people go vote, get everybody to vote. Cafeteria workers, I don't care whether they're retired teachers, I don't care who it is in the community, and take 6 or 8 or 10 people with you and educate yourself on the Republican ticket They know what they're going to do. They're all going to go vote for Housemaster. I'm just telling you. It's a done deal.
Yeah.
On our ticket, well, I'm telling people, and so is Jack and God, we really feel like we've got 3 candidates that are honest, going to try to get us back where we need to be. But vote for one of the 3 of us. But just don't vote for Deskin. And I know that sounds harsh, but she'll have 500 to $1 million. She'll have all the money she wants. And TV, as you know, can be very effective out there. And so do your homework and study to see who's running and what they're trying to do. And if you're a teacher, by all means, your livelihood's at stake.
Yes.
And your ability to be a master teacher is at stake. So get out there. Teachers have been bad the last 10 years. They've not even been involved in the process.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but that's happened through the year.
Right. Now, I was just going to ask you, do you have a website, or do you have places where people could go and get this information other than just personally? Is it online somewhere, or how could they find out some of these points you're making?
I always like to show this. It says Holmes Kids Win with my loop, and it says the website www.ivanholmes.com, and I filmed that first of all of us, and it's on there.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be putting a newsletter on there every week. It's just not for me, about me, it's educating on these issues.
Right.
And I'm going to be using that so they can get on there and look at that and educate themselves on what's coming up. But again, I want the superintendent beaten.
Yeah.
Because I do think she's destroyed the system. I want charter schools. We can have 1 million of them. But just don't take our public money and the vouchers and all of our surplus money, because it's not fair. It's apples and oranges and charter school. And this is a nationwide deal. I'm telling you, it's not just in Oklahoma. And so that is my second issue, is to be sure that Deskin and charter schools don't get in there.
Right.
And that's a tough chore. And then the third one, as I said, is to let people realize that our schools aren't near as bad as they're set up to be. Yes, they're getting in trouble because of the types of student, but our society's in trouble right now. It really is. And if we don't start changing this, America as a country is going to be doomed because drugs are ruining this country, and broken homes and crime and pregnancy. We've got, you've seen the article, we lead the nation in pregnancies of young women. Who's going to address that? The schools are the only thing there.
Well, that's well said. And all of us, most of us, are products of public school education. I am. With most of us are, and so of course it's a huge area. But again, I want to thank you for your time today, and it's been a pleasure to have Dr. Ivan Holmes, candidate for State Superintendent of Schools.
Vote.
Thank you, sir.